There is a quiet fury spreading among the baseline players on the outer practice courts of SW19, and it centers on an open secret that the tournament executives are desperately trying to hide. For decades, Wimbledon has held the power to subtly bend the court conditions to favor specific styles of play whenever a commercial emergency arises. This year, the emergency was the loss of the sport's most explosive heavy topspin ticket seller. By keeping the ryegrass cut to an aggressively dense millimeter standard and altering the core weight of the tournament balls, the organizers have effectively erased the tactical advantage of high-bouncing topspin. This video will pull back the curtain on the secret formula that has transformed the 2026 lawns, exposing how a surface meant to be an equal test has been quietly optimized to hand the world number one a built-in structural advantage before he even strikes a single ball. The underlying science of grass court maintenance is far more sophisticated than a simple morning trim. While the public relations machinery of the All England Club routinely proudly boasts about their strict maintenance of the traditional 8mm perennial ryegrass baseline, elite touring professionals know that the speed and trajectory of a tennis ball are governed entirely by soil compaction and underground moisture management. When Carlos Alcaraz withdrew due to his right wrist injury, the technical directors immediately realized that the tournament lacked the physical entertainment factor required to sustain maximum global viewership metrics. Without the Spaniard's explosive high-looping topspin to electrify center court, a long, slow baseline grind would drastically hurt audience retention. To artificially force a high-velocity, aggressive baseline spectacle, the ground staff altered the rolling schedule with the heavy 1-ton machinery, aggressively compacting the underlying clay base to produce an incredibly firm, baked foundation. This subtle mechanical modification completely alters how a tennis ball interacts with the lawn. On a standard, moderately hydrated grass surface, a tennis ball grips the organic material, causing the felt to fuzz up and slowing the trajectory down significantly after the bounce. However, by restricting the late evening watering cycles and packing the soil into an absolute concrete block, the tournament organizers have turned the grass into a slick, low-friction mirror. The ball no longer grips, it skids off the surface with zero loss of linear momentum, remaining incredibly low to the dirt and speeding through the hitting zone at velocities that mimic an indoor hardcourt. This structural change doesn't just alter the aesthetics of the match. It serves as a massive tactical death sentence for specific styles of play, while creating a flawless, customized paradise for Jannik Sinner. The data tracking models used by high-level coaching teams confirm that this exact low bounce profile completely destroys the biomechanical foundation of heavy topspin players. A tennis player who relies on heavy Western grips and massive shoulder rotation requires a high, true bounce to step into the court and unleash their power. When the ball consistently skids below the knee line, those vertical swing paths become completely useless, forcing clay court specialists to constantly defend from deep behind the baseline while scooping the ball upward with no offensive transition. The tournament has essentially built an environment where variety is actively penalized by the ground itself. By engineering a surface that artificially strips away the defensive tools of the field, Wimbledon has quietly removed the element of organic competition, leaving the draw entirely exposed to the flat, piercing groundstrokes of the reigning world number one. The mechanical advantage this newly engineered surface hands to Jannik Sinner is rooted in pure physics and spatial geometry. Grass court tennis inherently rewards low-bouncing, maximum-velocity linear ball strikers who prefer to take the ball on the rise, short-circuiting their opponent's reaction time. Sinner's modern baseline game is built entirely upon this exact aggressive framework. His ground strokes do not require a high vertical arc to be effective. Instead, he hits an incredibly flat, piercing ball that skims mere inches over the net tape, maintaining almost all of its initial velocity after hitting the ground. By compacting the subsurface to create a low-friction, concrete-like foundation, the groundskeepers have effectively locked Sinner into an absolute competitive comfort zone. He no longer has to adjust his strike zone or deal with the high, heavy shoulder height tracking loops that typically disrupt his timing on slower surfaces. The ball is delivered directly into his primary wheelhouse on every single exchange, allowing him to stand firmly on the baseline and dictate play with mechanical, robotic precision. This customized environment becomes a profound structural disadvantage when contrasted with the natural biomechanical needs of Carlos Alcaraz's traditional baseline identity. Alcaraz is a player who thrives on extreme physical variety, utilizing massive, violent topspin loops and high-kicking serves that require a high true vertical bounce to be terminal. To generate his trademark explosive power, his swing path demands a higher tracking trajectory where he can violently drop his racket head beneath the ball and explode upward. By keeping the perennial ryegrass cut to an aggressively dense, firm millimeter standard and intentionally implementing heavier, damp-resistant balls that absorb the morning humidity, the tournament has effectively neutralized that entire tactical vertical dimension. The heavy balls do not slide upward or take to the topspin rotation. Instead, they die upon impact, forcing anyone attempting a heavy clay court style to constantly scoop the ball from below their knees without any forward offensive momentum. This artificial dampening of topspin completely dismantles the defensive parity of the field. Under normal, slower conditions, a player facing Sinner can utilize heavy, looping defensive balls to push the world number one away from the baseline and disrupt his rhythm. But on the 2026 lawns, those defensive safety valves are completely erased. Any ball hit with passive topspin simply sits up at a highly attackable, waist-high level, or skids quickly off the surface, putting the defender in an immediate crisis of reaction time. The tournament layout has engineered a scenario where the physical ground itself is actively working to suppress Sinner's natural strategic counters, transforming the oldest championship in the world into a highly predictable, automated runway for a dominant baseline monopoly. The biomechanical strain this forces on Sinner's opponents is immense. When the ball skids so low, players are forced into deep, unyielding knee bends on every single shot, a movement pattern that rapidly drains the lower body and strains the lower back over a grueling 5-set match. Sinner, with his unique lean levers and impeccable lateral flexibility, is perfectly built to slide on grass while staying completely balanced and low to the ground. His slide mechanics allow him to recover instantly, turning defense into offense in a fraction of a second. For clay court specialists who are used to sliding into a ball on dirt, sliding on the slick, hard-packed grass of SW19 is a recipe for disaster. The reaction time is halved, the footing is treacherous, and the constant fear of a catastrophic slip completely paralyzes their aggressive instincts. Furthermore, the decision to use a specific high-density ball core drastically changes the acoustic and physical feedback of the tournament. Insiders have noted that the 2026 ball model features a tighter synthetic weave that minimizes fluffing, meaning the ball stays aerodynamically clean and small throughout its 9-game cycle. In tennis, a fuzzy ball slows down due to wind resistance, offering tactical lifelines to counterpunchers who rely on anticipation. A clean, small ball cuts through the air like a bullet. Sinner's high-velocity baseline exchanges become even more lethal under these parameters, as the ball reaches the baseline a full fraction of a second faster than it did in previous seasons. This is an environment engineered for short, brutal terminal points, a corporate dream designed to keep matches moving swiftly for television slots, but a sporting nightmare for competitive balance. By the time the tournament reaches the second week, the center cuts of the main show courts will be completely stripped of their green fiber, exposing the raw, hard-baked dirt underneath. In typical years, This wear and tear introduces erratic bad bounces that force players to rely on instinct and hand-eye coordination. However, with the extreme soil compaction methods implemented for 2026, these bare patches will act exactly like a fast, hard court, offering a true, uniform bounce that plays directly into the hands of a robotic machine like Sinner. There will be no organic chaos to disrupt his rhythm, no natural grass anomalies to level the playing field. The All England Club has successfully manufactured a synthetic paradise under the guise of traditional groundskeeping, ensuring that even in the absence of its most charismatic star, the remaining world number one can march toward the trophy with absolute mechanical predictability. The veteran who benefits most from this hidden mechanical alteration is Novak Djokovic. While the tournament organizers worked quietly to tailor the grass specifically to rescue Jannik Sinner from a potential ratings disaster, they accidentally handed an absolute weapon to an 8-time champion who possesses the single most lethal grass court return in the history of the sport. Djokovic does not rely on massive sweeping clay court baseline windups that require a high vertical bounce. Instead, his defensive and offensive transitions are built on compact, split-second anticipation and unmatched court coverage geometry. When the ball skids incredibly low and fast off the concrete-like soil base, it plays directly into his legendary ability to redirect pace, utilizing his opponent's raw velocity against them to freeze them in place. This creates an incredibly dangerous situation for the rest of the draw. By trying to engineer a fast-tracking baseline spectacle to compensate for losing Carlos Alcaraz, the tournament has inadvertently resurrected the ultimate grass court predator. Djokovic thrives in an environment where points are short and the bounce is uniform. At 39 years old, minimizing physical running distance is his primary objective. A faster, lower bouncing court means he can step closer to the baseline, block returns deep into the corners, and shorten the rallies before his lungs are put to an extreme physical test. The tournament tried to build a structural protective shield for Sinner, but they accidentally polished the exact surface that has allowed Djokovic to dominate center court for over a decade. The true corporate nightmare is how this mechanical shift alters the competitive layout of the actual bracket. Because Alcaraz withdrew late in the cycle, the automatic seeding distribution dropped Sinner and Djokovic onto a massive, catastrophic collision course in the top half of the tournament. The very adjustments meant to make Sinner look spectacular will now likely be weaponized against him in a premature, hyper-fast semifinal death match. Two generational eras of robotic baseline perfection are being forced to tear each other apart on a surface that leaves absolutely no room for physical error or tactical hesitation. Every single ground stroke will be a low-altitude bullet. Every return will be a deep knife into the baseline, and the winner will not crawl out of that match refreshed. They will enter the final weekend physically spent, leaving the entire championship vulnerable to whatever survivor emerges from the chaos of the bottom half. The tension resulting from these artificial changes has completely spilled outside the lines of the court, igniting a bitter psychological war inside the locker rooms and player lounges at SW19. While the casual viewing public settles in to watch the pristine television broadcast, professional tennis players are arriving at the venue completely furious. The clay court specialists and lower-tiered seeds have spent the morning sessions on the outer practice courts measuring the actual ball tracking data, and the metrics they are looking at have confirmed their worst collective fears. The ball is cutting through the air and skidding off the baseline at speeds that completely alter the competitive landscape. For the athletes who spend their entire careers mastering the patient, physical defense of European clay, the realization that the tournament surface has been intentionally sped up feels like a direct commercial betrayal by the executive boards. The whispers spreading among the coaching teams indicate that this isn't considered an accident of nature or weather, but a deliberate corporate mechanism to preserve a highly specific generational narrative. Professional tennis is fundamentally a business that relies on high-asset star power to drive global sponsorship deals and prime television slots. The moment Carlos Alcaraz withdrew from the draw, the tour's new era marketing strategy was thrown into an absolute panic. The corporate system desperately needs Jannik Sinner to dominate the tournament to cement his position as the solitary, untouchable face of the new generation. If a grueling, slow grass court surface allowed an unseeded baseline grinder to drag Sinner into a physical 5-hour marathon in the first week, the tournament risked losing both of its primary box office stars before the high-revenue second week even began. By ensuring the lawns play like a lightning-fast indoor court, the establishment has essentially insulated Sinner from the threat of an organic upset. This commercial manipulation has created a toxic atmosphere of resentment between the upper echelon of the sport and the lower-ranked competitors who rely on balanced parameters to make a living. Players who lack the massive sponsorship deals of Sinner or Djokovic are completely dependent on early-round prize money and ranking points to sustain their traveling teams. When they look at the 2026 conditions, they see a surface that has actively removed their tactical identity, turning their matches into a highly predictable, automated exit. The locker room is no longer focusing entirely on tennis strategy. Instead, it is consumed by intense, closed-door debates regarding structural equity and institutional favoritism. The corporate machinery of the All England Club is working overtime to push this internal mutiny away from the media microphones, but the psychological damage is already done. The field is completely fractured. The baseline players feel systematically cheated, and the tournament is operating under a dark cloud of athletic distrust before the opening round has even concluded. The final verdict of this structural experiment cannot be found within the traditional, sanitized public relations statements issued by the All England Club. It is written in the mechanical reality of a surface that has been fundamentally altered to survive a massive commercial crisis. The 2026 Wimbledon Championships will not be recorded as an organic test of ultimate athletic variation. Instead, it will be remembered as the fortnight where the physical parameters of grass court tennis were systematically bent to protect global media investments following the sudden, devastating medical exit of Carlos Alcaraz. By executing a quiet agronomic overhaul that turned the historic lawns into a low-bouncing, ultra-fast baseline highway, the tournament organizers achieved their immediate corporate goals, but they did so by completely sacrificing the tactical diversity that makes Grand Slam competition truly legendary. The technical tracking data recorded across the opening Monday of play has already confirmed the full extent of this mechanical transformation. Human nature dictates that when you strip away the friction of a playing surface, you completely alter the biological demands placed on the human body. The clay court specialists who arrived in London hoping to deploy heavy, looping defensive topspin variants have found themselves completely neutralized by a baked clay foundation that refuses to offer a true vertical bounce. The ball cuts through the dense ryegrass like an indoor bullet, staying far below the ideal striking zone and forcing defenders into a state of absolute kinetic panic. This is no longer a traditional lawn tennis tournament. It is a specialized, high-speed laboratory engineered to guarantee hyper-aggressive baseline execution for the modern digital consumer. The supreme irony of this entire commercial operation is that it has built an untouchable competitive runway for Jannik Sinner, while simultaneously reviving the single most dangerous grass court predator in the history of the sport. The tournament directors accelerated the baseline speed of the courts to ensure that Sinner could dictate play with absolute robotic precision, insulating the world number one from the threat of a slow, grueling early round upset. Yet in their desperate rush to manufacture high-velocity baseline rallies, they inadvertently polish the exact low-bounce environment that allows Novak Djokovic to operate at the absolute height of his strategic genius. At 39 years old, Djokovic no longer needs to worry about explosive, shoulder-high topspin loops pushing him deep behind the baseline. The system has handed him a fast, uniform surface where he can shorten the points, protect his physical longevity, and redirect his opponent's maximum pace with lethal, split-second anticipation. This accidental calibration has set the stage for a catastrophic, high-stakes structural bottleneck in the top half of the bracket. Because the system was forced to reconfigure the seeding distribution late in the operational cycle, Sinner and Djokovic have been dropped onto a violent, premature semifinal collision course. The very court modifications designed to showcase Sinner's linear ground strokes will now be directly weaponized against him in a brutal, low-altitude tactical war against an 8-time champion who refuses to give up his spiritual home. They will be forced to play the true championship match a full 48 hours ahead of schedule, engaging in an intense physical execution that will completely drain their energetic reserves before the final Sunday has even arrived. The survivor of that blockbuster top-half collision will not march into the final weekend refreshed and dominant. They will emerge covered in systemic fatigue, leaving the ultimate destiny of the trophy entirely vulnerable to the fresh, unbothered outliers cruising through the frictionless highway of the hallowed bottom half. Behind the scenes, the locker room is operating under an unprecedented cloud of athletic distrust and deep political resentment. The lower-ranked competitors can see exactly how the commercial machinery of the sport has warped the playing conditions to favor a select group of high-asset superstars. For the athletes who rely on structural fairness to secure vital ranking points and prize money, the realization that the tournament has been customized to protect television ratings feels like an absolute institutional betrayal. The pristine traditional illusion of Wimbledon has been permanently fractured, replaced by a cynical corporate model that prioritizes digital engagement algorithms over the foundational principles of balanced competition. Jannik Sinner does not need corporate handouts to prove his elite status, but the artificial realities of the 2026 lawns have turned his title defense into a highly manufactured narrative. The groundskeepers have successfully built his dream surface. The corporate executives have secured their prime-time broadcasting slots, but the spirit of organic sporting merit has been left completely broken on the fast, hard-packed dirt of SW19.